prosecutors called the unjustified fatal shooting of a 16-year-old boy after a high-speed chase in April of 2021. Two other officers have been charged with second-degree attempted murder for their roles in the confrontation. The charges were announced on Tuesday by prosecutors in Honolulu, less than a week after a grand jury had declined to indict the officers in connection with their actions leading up to the death of Iremamber Skycap on April 5th. The evidence supports the conclusions that the defendant's use of deadly force in this case was unnecessary, unreasonable, and unjustified under the law. Christopher T. Van Marter, a deputy prosecuting attorney, wrote in the criminal complaint. Prosecutors said that Jeffrey H.L. Tom, the officer charged with second-degree murder, had fired 10 shots, quote, without provocation, into the rear window of a Honda driven by Iremamber, hitting him 8 times. Iremamber died shortly after the shooting, according to prosecutors, who said that one of the bullets fired by Officer Tom had pierced Iremamber's aorta, another had fractured his spine, and that one of the bullets had pierced his lung, causing extreme internal bleeding. Iremamber's brother, Mark Skycap, who was in the front passenger seat, was struck in the right shoulder and left hand when the officers opened fire, the criminal complaint said. He survived. The shooting happened after a high-speed chase, according to investigators, who said that the car had been idling on a city street when 3 officers opened fire. The police said that the car had been reported stolen 2 days earlier and had been connected to an armed robbery, a purse snatching, and a theft. The gearshift lever of the car was still in the drive position when Iremamber was shot, and the vehicle struck an empty patrol car, climbed onto the sidewalk, went through the fence, and landed in a canal about 10 feet below street level. Prosecutors said that Officer Tom had written in a police report that the Honda had rammed his patrol car and had reversed toward him. But body camera footage, they said, contradicted those statements. His patrol car had a few minor paint chips and scuff marks, the criminal complaint said. The 2 officers who were charged with second-degree attempted murder were identified by prosecutors as Zachary K. Ani and Christopher J. Fredaluches. Prosecutors said that Officer Ani, 26, a 3-year police veteran, had fired 4 shots without provocation toward the passenger side of the Honda after it struck his empty patrol car. 2 of those shots hit Iremamber's brother, according to a criminal complaint. Officer Ani wrote in his report that he thought he had seen the butt of a firearm in the lap of the front seat passenger, but body camera footage contradicted his account, a criminal complaint said. Prosecutors said that Officer Fredaluches, 40, a 10-year veteran of the police department, had fired 1 round from his Glock 9mm pistol into the driver's side door of the Honda, but the bullet did not strike Iremamber. If convicted, all 3 officers would face mandatory sentences of life in prison and would be eligible for parole only after serving 20 years because semi-automatic firearms were used in the shooting. Their police powers have been removed, according to the Honolulu Police Department, which said that they had been placed on desk duty. The decision to charge the 3 officers perplexed Honolulu's interim police chief, Roddy Vanek. We are surprised by the prosecuting attorney's announcement to seek charges against the officers after a grand jury comprised of citizens decided not to indict them, Chief Vanek said in a statement. This is highly unusual, and we are not aware of a similar action having been taken in the past. Matt Vonch, a special counsel to the Honolulu prosecutor, Stephen S. Alm, said in an interview on Wednesday that it was not the first time that the office had asked a judge to determine if there was probable cause after a grand jury did not return an indictment. It's not that common, he said, but it does happen on occasion. Eric Seitz, a lawyer for the Skycap family, was not immediately available for comment on Wednesday, but he told the Associated Press that he was gratified that prosecutors were pursuing the case. We have suspected from the beginning, when we began to get information about how the events unfolded, that the shooting was entirely unjustified, he said. Now that we've seen the further evidence that's contained and attached to the charges, there's no question in our minds that this was an event that could have been and should have been prevented. In May, the Skycap family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the city of Honolulu and the officers who were involved in the shooting. The head of the state of Hawaii Organization of Police Officers did not immediately respond to a request for comment on Wednesday, but in a statement to the Associated Press on Tuesday, he voiced support for the officers. We continue to trust the process and will continue to stand by our officers. Okay, now this is a piece from a local Hawaii paper. Here's what we know about the shooting of 16-year-old Iremamber Skycap. On April 5th, Skycap was driving a stolen car along with 5 others between the ages of 14 and 22. Following a police chase, officers shot at the car and it crashed into a drainage ditch. Skycap was taken in critical condition to the hospital where he died. According to Honolulu Police Chief Susan Ballard, the car was connected to several crimes leading up to the fatal shooting, including an armed robbery just 20 minutes prior, though no guns were found at the scene of the crash. We don't know much about Skycap the person just yet, but we know he was born in Guam and he was the youngest of 8 children. We know from his sister that, quote, he would make you laugh at your lowest. We know from his teacher that he was friendly and playful and that he loved his family deeply. And we know from the gatherings at the place of his death that he was loved too. We also know he had a history of criminal behavior that resulted in multiple arrests. It can be hard to square these two accounts of Skycap, especially since we tend to think of criminal behavior as a function of personality. People who do bad things are bad people, like cartoon villains. In reality, criminality is often directly tied to whether or not one's basic needs are met. Think of what is alleged of Skycap and his peers just in the past week. Car thefts, purse snatching, and armed robbery. These are not the behaviors of a normal 16-year-old. Of course, Skycap was not a normal 16-year-old. He was living in poverty. Investigators believed that he was unsheltered. That daily type of trauma is compounded by the fact that he's Micronesian, which means he almost certainly experienced racism. These circumstances and experiences change how you perceive your place in the world and what options you really have. Judging by Skycap's company, 4 other teenagers and a 22-year-old, it's hard to say his behavior was a result of some unique individual sociopath. The trajectories of their lives are symptoms of a society that has failed on a fundamental level. There are people who emerge from those circumstances successfully, but they're the exceptions. It takes an extraordinary person to overcome poverty in this country. It shouldn't. What if it didn't? None of this excuses his actions, just as his alleged crime spree doesn't justify his killing. He should be facing the consequences of his actions now, in custody and alive. But if we're not actively trying to rectify the root sources of poverty and homelessness, I worry that even the most comprehensive police reform imaginable won't matter. Powerlessness also corrupts. Can we kneel, please, for 9 minutes and 29 seconds for Iremamber Skycap?